So Casey and myself, we both handle cases that of USCCA members that have been involved in use of force events, and we act as criminal defense attorneys for them. Casey and I have developed quite the relationship over the last few months, actually, after having met at the USCCA convention in Wisconsin. And we were talking about some of the cases that we've handled, specifically as they relate to firearms, okay? Not necessarily just use of force, that's a secondary component, but firearms and the eventual resolution of some of these cases. Now, a lot of the cases that Casey handles are actually for cops that are involved in officer-involved shootings. There was one particular that actually made the news that we wanted to go over because there's some aspects of this could be very, very instructive, not just for law enforcement officers, many of which are members of USCCA, but the general civilian population as well. So, Casey, you want to mention the sort of the facts of the case?
Sure. A couple years ago, I responded to an officer-involved shooting. Unfortunately, it's not something that is infrequent for my practice. Majority of my cases are either in custody deaths or officer-involved shootings. And it was around New Year's, and it rolled out there, and actually 2 of my member agencies for which I represent were involved. And it was a pretty crazy shooting. There was a police pursuit, a canine got shot, and ultimately, multiple officers ended up firing and hitting the suspect. It turns out that the DA found that the shooting was legitimate. Officers were all exonerated for their use of force. However, 2 of the officers ended up with a new issue, and the new issue was one that I hadn't personally encountered before. It was that their firearms were not specifically approved, right? We have issues where you get letters from your chief to go buy specific firearms. You want to make sure that you're compliant in terms of going to the range and getting qualified on those firearms. And for me, usually it's an issue of how's your aim? It's not an issue of
the hardware itself.
Right. These were assault rifles that were not registered, and they were also, one of them was a short-barreled rifle. And
so we've got both federal and state nexus on
it. It was not anything that we were necessarily even prepared to deal with that evening, because it was kind of a shock to the system to learn, hey, the issue not so much is the shooting today, but it's the method in which you deployed those bullets. Today, it's about the gun. And so I wanted to bring that story to you because I know about your history and your experience. And what I have found is that sometimes my police officer clients are not that proficient in terms of not only the gun laws, but the hardware that they're carrying. Thankfully, we were able to resolve this case civilly in terms of a civil injunction that those firearms were not prohibited to be possessed by those officers, and the guns were obviously destroyed. But it was a huge deal because our clients can't have felonies and continue to be police officers, and so it was a good resolution. But I was hoping that maybe you could kind of give me some tips for my law enforcement clients who, I have the gun nuts, and then I have those who just carry a gun.
Yeah. So I think this actually transcends just cops, to be quite frank with you. So, there's a lot of people who become self-educated on firearms through the internet, through YouTube channels, by, reading code sections themselves. Unfortunately, as you well know, code sections are oftentimes, modified through case law. And that's usually the thing that's absent. I see on internet discussion forums and things like that where people will be citing specific code sections, which may in themselves might have been enjoined by subsequent case law and things like that. Or alternatively, with civilians, they'll talk to their local gun shop, right? And they'll say, can I do this? Is this legal?
Or build me something cool.
Or build me something
Or
cool.
sell me parts that look neat.
And, the problem is twofold on this. Number one, oftentimes, especially with the larger retailers, the people that work at those shops are not necessarily long-term employees. They're going to be there for maybe 6 months to a year, and then they're going to move off to do some other type of job or whatever. And to be quite candid, they don't know, right? And, oftentimes they just start making stuff up, or, alternatively, they have sales quotas that they're looking to meet, and they're selling you perfectly legal parts. But when those parts are assembled in a particular configuration, they may, in fact, be violating the law. I always tell people, if you come to me and ask me a question about, marital dissolution, whatever I learned about community property law, I learned 30 years ago in law school, and I absolutely know that there's been multiple changes over the years. What I'm telling you is dated and may not even be relevant anymore.
Right.
Okay, guys, I'm going to pause this video for just a moment. USCCA, which is a sponsor of this video, is doing a giveaway. And it's really cool. All right. Now, you can find out all about it by simply clicking on the description below this video. It'll link to it. You're going to want to participate because it's going to end pretty soon. So these things are changing daily. And if you're going to a traditional criminal defense attorney or a civil defense attorney, their granular knowledge of the law as it relates to Second Amendment jurisprudence is probably not going to be there. That's one of the reasons, quite frankly, that a lot of criminal defense attorneys will hire me as a consultant when there's a nexus with a firearm, because, they get, the, use of force, but they don't know necessarily whether or not this particular chunk of hardware is even legal to possess, right? And, it's always a good idea, whether you're a cop or whether you're a civilian, to have somebody who is a firearms attorney that doesn't have a dog in the hunt, so to speak. If you're looking at building this Mega Blaster 3000 and you're not going to get good legal advice. Well, you shouldn't be getting legal advice at all from the person who's trying to sell you the parts, right? And you're probably not going to get good legal advice from the guy who happens to be a transactional law attorney who lives down the street, even if he claims to be a gun guy, right?
Right.
You're going to want to talk to somebody who does, in fact, focus on Second Amendment jurisprudence. Just as if I were going to be dealing with something involving an officer-involved shooting, you better believe I'm reaching out to you, right? Because there's going to be certain things that deal with officer policies and, especially in departments and where you practice, that I'm just totally unaware of, right? So we look for that guidance, amongst ourselves.
And it's an interesting thing because a lot of times my clients, because they are employed, have the secondary component of keeping their job, right? And for some of them, freedom comes second to maintaining their employment, maintaining their benefits, keeping their pension. And so that can kind of weigh in and factor into how a case resolves, right? Because not only are they thinking, hey, I don't want a conviction, but I also need to make sure I have a conviction that doesn't prohibit me from carrying state or federally, and all those components that go with making sure you can keep your livelihood for your family. Another issue I see with law enforcement clients is they buy a firearm and then they don't register it because they think that the FFL is going to register it.
Interesting. Yeah. So there's a number of different factors involved in this, right? So if I'm just a law enforcement officer and I'm going to be manufacturing my own firearm. Now, there's some certain areas of California laws, and I know that people from all over the country are watching this, but within California law, there's certain requirements for registration on even home-built guns and serialization. But prior to that, there was no requirement, right? Now, that's fine if you're going to take that firearm and keep it in your safe and, go out to the range and do whatever. But if you're going to start carrying that gun in your patrol vehicle, right, and you're going to start using it in conjunction with your employment, there's state registration requirements that are, so there's qualification requirements that are associated with that. There's, you're putting not just your potential freedom, but also your pension at risk. Yeah. And that's another thing that I do want to mention too. And this has to do with what we sometimes refer to as client management. a client, especially someone who comes to us in a state of extremis, right? They've just been arrested or they're under investigation or something like that. We as attorneys kind of have, and I mean, maybe this isn't fair, but we sort of have a prioritization, of what we want to do. Think of it from a standpoint of a doctor, right? Somebody comes into a doctor's office and they are potentially, suffering a life-threatening disease or injury. The doctor's primary job, the focus, is keeping them alive right here, right now. Now, if the client's primary focus is on having their tattoo removed, okay, the doctor's going to be like, what? That's not even relevant to me right now. I need to keep you breathing. Right, yeah, exactly. And we're the same way, right? Our focus always is going to be on protecting your ability to be free, not be incarcerated. That's always at the top of our food chain. Getting your property returned to you, that's really, really low.
Right. I see that a lot where clients want motion to return property. And in some instances, I will wrap it into my retainer, especially if my client has heirloom guns that were taken or, quite a bit that is of value to them. But like you told me the other day, some of these guns are cheap. They're not worth, the juice is not worth the squeeze. Right?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I think I told you, I had a client that we had all charges dismissed, was completely exonerated.
That's a huge win.
A huge win, right? The guy was looking at upwards of a year in jail, and then was completely apoplectic because he couldn't have his 380 bodyguard returned to him. And we're looking at him like, you literally, you could be in jail right now, and you're losing your mind off of a 380 bodyguard.
You won.
Yeah.
You won.
And so, I am a gun guy, so I totally get the emotional connection to firearms and everything like that. But there needs to be a point where you realize that your freedom is the most important thing. Hardware can be reacquired. Right. As long as you still are in the position where you're not a felon, where you can still reacquire your stuff. We sometimes just let those things go.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you can get out of having a charge that's going to prohibit you from carrying for a lifetime or stay with that in itself should be worth.
That should always
everything.
Be the top. Yeah, that should always be the top. Well, Casey, thank you for coming down and visiting me. No, it's great to have you. As always, you're always welcome here.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for watching me. If you need to get in contact with me, you can always do so by emailing me at steven@artemishq.com. Casey, do you want to give your information?
Sure. Casey with a K at CastilloHarper.com.
All right, guys. Thanks again. And remember, train constantly, train consistently, train repetitively, and train with purpose. Above all else, stay safe.
Before you go, you just missed one of our best videos that got over 500,000 views. Click right here to watch it now.